Hi, my name's Frazer and I'm with Lonesome Dog Studios, and today we're going to be looking at heavy guitar processing. Let's get into it. First off, this is what it's sounding like all in, everything done. Cool, pretty chunky. So the tones on their own are sounding like this. They're both DI'd guitars and they both went through some rendition of a neural DSP amp. So that's what they're sounding like. So pretty chunky, pretty fizzy as well. There's some crunch in there, but it's a bit hissy. There's definitely some things we can do to improve them. So let's get into it. Okay, so step one, I'm going to pull up this stock Pro Tools EQ. And the first moves we're going to make on it are a high pass and a low pass. We've got high pass at around about 100 Hertz. And we've got a low pass at just under 10K, basically. And this one's really important, because there's a lot of unnecessary fizz and detail above 10K in the guitars. It's common practice for heavy distorted guitars to get low pass around this area, so we can check out what that sounds like. So those two, they're just tightening up the sound, cleaning up the sound a little bit and getting rid of some of that really like in-ear hissy stuff that you don't need up here. And then along here, we have individual bands, quite sharp cues, pulling out some specific resonances that are found. So it's important to note the frequencies that they're at here. We've got two around the 5K mark, one at 2.5K and one at 500 Hertz. These are quite common problem areas in heavy distorted guitars, but I have to stress that they're not hard and fast rules. These are just areas that are starting points to check out. One of the reasons I'm using the stock Pro Tools EQ is it doesn't have an analyzer on it, so it forces you to use your ears to make critical decisions more than your eyes. It's something I've been guilty of, so I've been trying to make sure I'm doing that instead of looking for spikes and cutting them. So if I bring these in, and we'll do a before and after on these cuts. Before. So to me they still sound pretty aggressive, but they're not quite as offensive in upper mids and in the high end. They're not quite as pokey and just a little bit more balanced in my opinion. And then the last move I've done on this EQ here is a little cut at 104 Hertz. And this is very specific, because what I've done is I've identified that on the drum tracks, the foundation of the kick is at 52 Hertz. So what I've done is I've boosted that. And then on the bass guitar, I've boosted the even order harmonic of that, which is 104 Hertz. I find that that gets those two instruments to gel together quite well. And if we just pull a little bit out on the guitar bus at 104 Hertz as well, it just opens up that area for the bass guitar to live a little bit more. And I find that it just makes all of the instruments slightly more cohesive as well. So we can quickly check that in the mix as well. Subtle, but just adds a little bit of glue, I think, to the low end of the guitars in comparison to the bass guitar. Okay, so the next step is I've got a different EQ here. This one does have an analyzer, and I've made a couple more surgical cuts here, just a couple other frequencies that I wasn't enjoying, and a wider cut around about the just past 5K there. That's a 5.5K. Just a really, really wide and shallow, just to put a little bit of brightness out the guitars. But the main reason I've got this EQ up here is because on this EQ you can control the left and right channels independently. So this is a trick, again, to get the guitars to gel with each other and add a bit of cohesiveness. What we've done is we've got 2 bands for the left and the right channel, and they're a very similar frequency range. Wide Q, very shallow, not a huge move at all. But what we're doing is we're boosting on one side and cutting on the other. Similar sort of trick to the kick and the bass we mentioned before, where it just carves a little bit of space for them to sound slightly more independent but still in harmony with each other. So I've made this move just beneath 1K here, so it's in the mids definitely, but you can select these 2 bands and move them around whilst you're listening to find the sweet spot. I think it just helps them gel a little bit and gives them a bit of unique information without separating them too much. Okay, so the next step, we're in VMR and we've just got a little bit of compression and a little bit of saturation. And again, this compression is quite gentle. I think we're adding a little bit of gain here as well, just because the guitars are a bit quiet on the bus. But it's also imparting a little bit of colour, a little bit of vintage compression colour to it, as well as using the preamp emulation here. So if I check these out. So it's just adding a little bit of attack. The saturation is definitely adding some of that as well, adding some harmonics to it, and it's just tightening up the low end a little bit as well. So in the next step, similar to the bass processing, what we've got is a 1 band in a multi-band compressor and similar frequency range as well to the bass guitar. But what we're looking for is we want to control that big boom of bass when the guitarist palm mutes. When you mute the strings like that and you chuck, it throws a load of low-end information. So we need to make sure we're controlling that. So if I before and after that. So you saw me messing around with the gain a little bit there as I was playing, and you can see the compressor react when the palm mutes come in. So you can see it pulling down that low end when it gets a little bit too much, and it really tightens up the sound of the guitars. Overall, it's quite drastic. So we'll A/B that in the mix. So it's really just tightening up the low end and making sure that nothing's jumping out too crazily and distracting our ears. It's keeping it all very flat and consistent and powerful. So then the next step, good old decapitator, just a little bit of saturation and bringing some thickness to it. Now that we've controlled the lows, we can definitely add a little bit more back in. So I will A/B this here. think that's just bringing some character to the low mids and getting the guitars to pop a little bit more. After we've got everything controlled, we can definitely add some energy to it as well. And the final step for this guitar bus processing here, we've got good old Soothe. Now you can use any de-esser for this, but I found Soothe works the best in my experience. And we've just got it's peaking at around 3.5K. Like I mentioned earlier, it's in a sort of problem area for the guitars. So if we A/B this as well, it'll be quite a drastic difference, but it will just pull out some of that ear ringy stuff. Without a doubt, our addition of saturation and compression, since we were doing the EQ before, will bring out some of those resonances you were trying to tame earlier. So you just have to be cautious of your signal chain and how you're affecting it. So that's just controlling some of the really spiky resonances that can be brought back out through the compression and saturation we threw at it a little bit earlier. Then the next step, what we want to do is we can send from this guitar aux here, send it to a room. Important things to note about a guitar room or a reverb emulating a guitar room sound is I usually keep mine quite short, keep the pre-delay quite low, pull out some highs and lows, which I've also reinforced with the EQ after it, just tightening up that band. We don't want to affect that area of the raw guitar tone. We just want to provide some ambience for some of the stops and in between some of the chugs. It just fills it out a little bit. So this is with and without. I'll just mute that. Definitely adds a bit of like thickness and character to the guitar sound. It's a very subtle effect, but when you've got such big, crushing, distorted guitars, you don't want to go too crazy on the room sound because it can get a bit blurry quite quickly. And the final step I've got here is in relation to lead guitars, and it's basically a trick. I've been using Soothe as a ducking, much like track spacer. From the lead guitar bus over here, I've got a send bus 32, and then the key input on Soothe 2 is bus 32. So you can see as the lead plays, I've got Soothe looking at the area between 4 and 8K. 8K is a very special EQ band. If I find guitars or drums or vocals or anything like that need a little bit more presence and need to come forward in the mix a little bit, I find that 8K is a nice area to add a little bit of energy. So what we're doing is when the lead guitar is playing and we want that to be front and center and come forward in front of the guitars, we will get Soothe to pull some of that area out of the rhythm guitars just to carve out some space for it. So this is what it's sounding like with and without. This is without. Quite fast attack, extremely fast release. I'm not trying to ruin the rhythm guitars. I'm just trying to buy some space for the lead to live in so that they can still gel dynamically. They're working together, but we're providing some space for the lead to really cut through and come to the front of the mix. So that was all of the steps I've used today to process these stereo heavy guitars, and also a little extra trick just to get your leads to pop through your mix a little bit more. So hopefully some of these techniques were useful and will be helpful. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.